Well, welcome to this evening's meeting. I'm Dennis Reardon, President of Menunkatuck Audubon, and excited to have Katie Blake here to talk to us about the Northeast habitat program that she runs out of Highstead. As always, we wish to thank the indigenous communities native to the chapter area, including the Pecusset, Wepawag, Quinnipiac, Tucket, Menunkatuck, and Hammonasset peoples. As we advocate for the conservation of land and its wildlife, we're indebted to the work of the native and indigenous people who cherished the land for thousands of years before European colonization. Quick couple of announcements here about upcoming events. Wednesday, January 24th on Zoom, we'll have our members night with member photos and bird quiz and more. Saturday, February 10th, we'll have an eagle watch at Chepaug Dam. There are two sessions, one at 9 and one at 11. You can pick either one. There's a limit of 20 for each. Tuesday, February 13th, Gina Nickel will be back to talk to us about flockology, unraveling the mysteries of bird flocks. And then the following Friday evening at the community center in Orange, Lights Out Connecticut will have its winter gala. And you can sign up for all of those on the Menunkatuck website. So Katie Blake is a conservationist at Highstead, a regional conservation and ecological stewardship nonprofit in Reading. She supports regional conservation partnerships across the Northeast, Eastern Connecticut, Eastern New York State, and New England, with the effort to increase the pace and scale of conservation. Before she joined Highstead, she was the manager of urban bird conservation initiatives for Audubon, Connecticut. And she worked closely with us on the New Haven Watershed Urban Wildlife Refuge Partnership, which is still a mouthful. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks, Dennis. It's great to be here.
Now let's get this going again. You see that all right?
Yep. Looks good to me.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Shall I take it away? All right. Just give me the hook if you want me to say 5-10 minutes. I'm keeping time too, but if it's like, let's wrap it up in like 5 minutes, give me that, then I'll know to speed through some. There's a lot here. But just don't be afraid, unmute and tell me, because it's hard to follow my PowerPoint and the Zoom. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I'm so excited when Dennis reached out to ask me to present, and any opportunity I get to reconnect with you all, Menunkatuck, and certainly the work that I got to do together and with Audubon, and that I still get to do with Audubon, which I'm going to share a little bit about today. So I'm very excited to be here, and glad it's virtual today. The weather's pretty nasty out there, so hope you all are warm and enjoy the presentation. And thanks for sharing slides, Dennis. So next slide. I'm going to be sharing work hang on a second here, coordinating too many things, that in a presentation that is definitely was a collaborative effort. So we're going to be talking about partnerships for bird conservation, and very much this project, the projects I'm going to talk about, this physical PowerPoint or versions of it have been a collaborative effort for presentations that the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative has been doing for the last couple of years. So I want to give credit to my partners at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Audubon, Vermont, Sharon Audubon Center, and the Somerset County, excuse me, Regional Soil and Water Conservation District out in Maine. Oops, next slide. So just a few goals for the presentation that I'm hoping to tell you a little bit about some of the collaborative work that's happening within a partnership that I'm part of, the Regional Conservation Partnership Network. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that and learn how partners are working collaboratively for birds and bird conservation, and how and what kinds of bird-friendly practices they're engaging in around grassland and forest management. And then wanted to point you to some relevant resources that I think Menunkatuck and groups that you work with and yourself personally would be interested in aid your engagement conservation efforts. Next slide. So I wanted to share a little bit about who I am. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Dennis. But this picture up in the upper left with the hat on, I'm measuring a bird. It's almost ancient history, but I share it to show that I spent about, I don't know, 15, 16 years. I studied birds, did a lot of research. I completed my master's thesis on migratory patterns of common and roseate terns, and for many years had the pleasure of working with Audubon groups across New England, as well as the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And over those years, I also worked, as Dennis said, for Audubon Connecticut for about 5 years, managing the urban conservation projects as part of the bird-friendly communities. It was just totally awesome. And because I lived in New Haven, got to hang out with Dennis and Carl and others a lot. And we did a lot of fun work together. And oops, sorry, I'm looking at my own, I got two screens here, sorry. And in my current role as a conservationist at Highstead, I support these regional conservation groups across the Northeast and their efforts to support scale up the pace of conservation by bringing in capacity building and networking events, peer exchange events, and fundraising opportunity. And I'm also a mom of two littles who I hope you can't hear the ruckus of bath time in the room behind me, but they love birds, and obviously they would with me as their mom. And it's very exciting and fun to get to love birds in a whole new way. And it's just a very big part of who I am right now. So, and it's a lot of fun. Next slide. So one of the first questions to address here is why birds, right? How can birds inform and expand our conservation practices? Birds are very powerful, as you all know. Next slide. Oh, go back. Oh no, you're good. Sorry. Go ahead. Birds, this is nothing you don't know, but they're easy to hear and to see and to count. They're appealing and popular. A lot of birders, there's easy access into birding and into citizen science that are parts of organized networks. Their tools, again, for bird conservation and engagement are free and accessible. Many of them are. And Audubon is so great at making them more accessible. And there are bird-oriented projects, now that I'm, really in a more generalized conservation position at Highstead, are very fundable, right? They're charismatic megafauna, except sometimes they're pretty small. And they tell us about multiple environmental factors, right? That's happening out there that we can learn. Next slide. And birds are if you think about birds as indicators of health and diversity of a natural system, then access to bird data is quite useful. So regular birders have been contributing observations, like I'm sure you all just did, or I'm not sure if it's still going on, Christmas bird count for decades, and Christmas bird count for more than a century. eBird, which will come into play into a lot of the work that we've been doing as an initiative, is a game changer, right? And it's not just for birders, it's for everybody. And how many people, I'm sure, I can't see a raise of hands, but I'm sure you're on eBird, keep lists in some way, or have used it in part of your conservation and engagement efforts. And so just as birds can help drive effective conservation, so can partnerships, which is our main theme today. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. Next slide. But birds are powerful, of course, and they are in trouble. And I'm not telling you or probably showing you graphics you've not seen before, right? This is, I think, from the Audubon report, but birds need our help. And since 1970, I'm sure you've seen the report that 3 billion birds in North America have been lost. And this trend is especially drastic for grassland birds, as you can see in these images. And while the cause of population decline are not exactly the same for every species, a common factor is loss of quality habitat, whether it's on their breeding grounds or along their migratory routes or on their wintering grounds. So we're thinking about birds in all aspects of their life cycle. Next slide. But birds are a good handle for involving people, as we just talked about, in terms of their accessibility and their engagement and their charisma. But a good proportion of New Englanders are birders, and also a good proportion of landowners put wildlife near the top of their reasons for owning woods in this graph in green on the right. So birds are really one way to bring together groups of landowners in partnerships, which is going to be a theme you're going to hear about in some of these projects that I'm going to share a little bit about tonight. And so that's the power of birds. And now I'm going to share a little bit about the power of partnerships. If you can go to the next slide. So we have this charismatic and keystone set of species guiding and shaping conservation projects, and hearing really about just how powerful they can be. This next piece is understanding how regional conservation can collaborate along shared conservation values and inform and expand conservation practices to help birds. So next slide. So one of the main parts of my job at Highstead is supporting this network, these groups, the Regional Conservation Partnership Network. And so this is a partnership very similar to, a group like Menunkatuck or the New Haven Urban Wildlife Conservation Partnership that Dennis mentioned. But for RCPs, for short, they're these informal yet very organized and diverse networks of partners, and partners from a land trust, from Audubon centers, nature centers, municipalities, foresters, and they usually have a host organization that act as a fiscal agent, and some are nonprofits. There are a few, so there's about 50 in the Northeast, this map, 52, and some are nonprofits, but most are these general groups that come together over shared priorities. And they started popping up in the 90s, and they work together across boundaries, right? At multi-state, multi-town, larger than their own particular service area. And they find other partners who have similar goals as them and that they could do more together. And so in 2012, these network of RCPs are very interested in connecting with others. Well, what is Connecticut doing? Maine might ask, what is Connecticut doing around grassland bird protection, or how are Vermont and New Hampshire approaching a particular conservation issue? So they were interested in connecting with each other. And so Highstead Foundation serves as a fiscal agent and support for this network, and is one of the main roles that I serve in my position is supporting them. And we provide service really in 3 ways to these groups and to this network. And so peer learning and exchange. So we offer opportunities for leaders of these individual partnerships to come together and share like, I'm having a hard time engaging people. What do I do? Or how are you getting projects and interest in projects from partners and getting people to the table? The other thing that we do is help information exchange on best practices around landscape conservation. And then the third is bringing capacity building with training or mentoring, coordination of multi-RCP, really big fundraising opportunities that have an effect at a regional scale. So next slide. And so the work of RCPs within the network is locally grounded, as they are familiar with the geography. These groups, again, saying RCPs, but they're made up of 20, 40 different partners that consistently come to the table to help advance a goal. Oh, just go back one. Yeah, thanks. So they're familiar with the geography, right? And they are the leaders in their community, and of course are connected with landowners and others. And so they have a deep knowledge of the region, what the issues are. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. So next slide. So they're locally grounded and regionally effective. So the work of RCPs, it really boils down to that they can do more together than they could by themselves. And again, part of my role at Highstead is that I help support this exchange among the RCPs. So within an RCP, you have these 20, 40 partners that consistently meet. They have some kind of steering committee that drives things forward. And then when you look at the region, you have this network of RCPs. So one RCP is connecting with another across states. And it's very exciting and something that I'm very passionate about. Next slide. So in 2015, so almost 10 years ago, RCP leaders developed a set of priorities that they wanted us, Highstead, to help them pursue at this landscape scale, at the Northeast scale. And one of those objectives was identifying and pursuing having a collective impact on a shared ecological priority across the Northeast. And so around the same time, Highstead had been talking with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to see if they might help them advance their land trust initiative that they have, and I'll talk about that in a second, via this network, while supporting the goals of the RCPs. Next slide. Okay. Sorry, skip to the next slide. And so, hang on one second, I'm so sorry. There's a lot of background noise at my house. So their interest was, sorry, actually on the last slide, we skimmed over it, but there was interest in the shared priority. And so that shared priority was birds and their habitats across the Northeast. And so again, through the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative, this is a project of Cornell. And the goal of this initiative is to bring together bird conservation partners and land trusts. In a nutshell, it provides land trusts and partners with a variety of resources, such as conservation resource directory, fundraising opportunities, and the like. And if you haven't checked this out before, birdtrust.org, you can check it out for more information. Next slide. So this partnership between Cornell and the RCP network really kind of gave birth to the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative. It gave rise to this group. And you can go to the next slide. And it's guided by these 3 goals that you can see here. And it represents an opportunity for RCPs, these regional conservation groups and their partners, Audubon groups across the Northeast, and Cornell to leverage their resources and focus their on-the-ground activities in ways that can contribute to longer-term land protection objectives. And I'm going to highlight some projects that are happening on the ground within the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative to illustrate some of these management and community outreach strategies partners have been using, and to illustrate how how an RCP, working with an RCP, they've been able to help scale the lessons of those across the network. Next slide. So getting back a little bit to the birds being in trouble, one way to help birds and expand conservation practices is on private land. And I know this is a little fuzzy, this graphic, but there's a huge opportunity here in New England. And so when you look at forests and think about forests, Northeast particularly is important for breeding habitat for a variety of a wide variety and high density of birds, as you can see in this map. It's home to the highest numbers and highest densities of breeding birds. So this is an enormously valuable producer, this region, for birds when habitat quality is maintained. Next slide. And so from a bird's eye view, it's the largest intact temperate forest left in the world here in the Northeast. And you can see the percentage of forest cover for each state, and in parentheses is the percentage of that forest cover that is privately owned. So a high percentage of that forest is privately owned, as you can see, 2/3, 3/4, Maine, 95%. So if we're going to save birds or have substantial climate change mitigation and resilience through forests, or do both, hopefully, partnerships with private landowners is essential. Next slide. And again, another graph, same story in New England, roughly 2/3 and higher really land is privately owned. And so these, again, relationships with private landowners are critical. And those private landowners have relationships with these partners within the RCPs, and that will come into play in some of these case studies, which is the next slide I'm going to share with you. So I'm going to share a few case studies of these collaborative bird conservation projects in action here in New England on private land that partners of the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative have been leading. And I'm going to start first one with bird-friendly forestry management. And so when the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, we really do need to talk about a mouthful of an acronym, but a shorter tag, came together, early conversations between partners. So all the Audubon leaders in the Northeast, regional conservation partners throughout the Northeast came together, and mutual interest boiled down to around projects, bird-friendly forestry. Everyone was either already engaged in or interested in learning and exchanging with each other. And so we applied for some funding as an initiative through Cornell to run some pilot projects on the ground and to really test out how and where RCPs and land trusts could aid in helping to expand the efforts already happening. For example, through Audubon or through some of these other regional groups. And so we have some wonderful examples. These slides almost in their entirety come from Steve Hagenbu at Audubon, Vermont. Great, thank you. Next slide. So Vermont, right? Who doesn't love Vermont? As a region has tremendous value as forests, stabilizing soil, right? Supporting biodiversity, giving us maple syrup, providing opportunities for recreation and tourism. And so this really suggests that if we want healthy forests at a landscape scale, we have to be mobilizing a variety of partners who might not otherwise be able to do this single-handedly. So here's a specific project called the Cold Hollow to Canada. That's one of the RCPs. I'll show you where that is in a second, up in Vermont at the border of Canada. and what they did to work in their woodlots program. And so their mission is here. And you can see that they have a concentration on being community-led, and they're focused on working landscapes and the concern for a changing climate. And so how partnership can amplify results through this region was of specific concern for this group and for this program. And they did an excellent, they have an incredible model. So this is where they're located. Next slide. And so this woodlots program, you can go to the next slide, was indeed a community-led project. And so it focused on woodlots used, the private woodlots used for firewood, and how the parcels can best sequester carbon and adapt to a changing climate. And so this program engages groups of landowners at a town, from a town with a contiguous or nearly contiguous forested properties. And they focus their management activities on that scale. So this neighbor to neighbor collaboration results in a cumulative impact that's more significant than one property owner could have on their own. And so landowners, usually abutting landowners, right, where their parcels abut, are invited to be part of a woodlots group, and they just enjoy these informal gatherings and each season, and they get to work with this regional conservation partnership, Cold Hollow to Canada. They get information and feedback on wildlife habitat development and best management practices on invasive control and the like. Next slide. And they help develop management plans for the woodlots program, which begin with assessing the habitat for birds, which is where Audubon Vermont comes in. They would have this strong partnership and have been working together for years, long before I think our initiative came along. And they are able to supply these woodlot owners with this forest bird habitat assessment. And I know that you probably know of all the work happening like this in Connecticut, and if I have time, we'll share some of that example as well. So they identify habitat that already exists that might be better, and how to open it for different birds of interest, and what their proximity to another woodland owner when they look at their properties from a landscape level, what it can tell us and how they can help manage that really collectively. Each landowner implementing their own piece, but how collectively it can be viewed quite differently than one property at a time. Next slide. And so they're looking at birds as indicators, and what these assessments are looking for is a wood parcel that might have great habitat for scarlet tanager, or but might have very little for black-throated blue warbler, so maybe lacks that dense mid-understory. Or looking for habitat for black-throated green warblers, like tall conifers. And so depending on what they find in the woods, they might want to thin or again, create sunny spots where regeneration can occur. Next slide. And so one of the greatest benefits of the Woodlots project is that it addresses clusters of these contiguous properties rather than individual properties. And assessing them together gives a more comprehensive picture than looking at just one woodlot. And the point being that these contiguous properties could be handled by several land trusts or landowners working in concert toward a common goal. Next slide. And engaging landowners in thinking about these opportunities and ways to steward their lands in accordance with these bird-friendly practices through this partnership with this Cold Hollow to Canada partnership continues to prove itself really to be an effective way to connect intentionally landowners in a priority geography. So RCPs like Cold Hollow help curate and maintain a robust group of these interested landowners with these geographies. And Audubon, Vermont, can be more effective and connect with this established group that they may not have had access or knowledge of. And these landowners are exposed to this ongoing messaging and education and peer learning, right? Like, isn't it better when you can learn what your neighbor did to thin, or what it looks like when you do a certain management technique and you don't maybe have to do it first, and you get to kind of share with each other and connect each other with technical assistants and contractors you might have worked with. And so it keeps that message of reinforcing bird-friendly forestry within the community and builds their knowledge. And working with RCPs like Cold Hollow Audubon, again, increases its impact by maintaining an audience of these landowners in a geography that they may not have been exposed to. Next slide. So another smaller example from, not small, because I love maple syrup, who doesn't love maple syrup, but again, from Vermont, Audubon, Vermont, and I know here we have this in Connecticut too, but the Cold Hollow to Canada RCP helped sugarbush owners implement Audubon's bird-friendly maple program. And so if you don't know or aren't as familiar with, bird-friendly maples is this way of managing a sugarbush that enhances its value as a bird habitat, encouraging more structural diversity in the woods, and not just for maple. And this particular example was at a farm in Belvedere, Vermont. And so you can go to the next slide. One of the difficult parts, as I understand it, when I've listened to Steve give this talk, is accomplishing bird-friendly maple forests, is that it can be of little interest that a contractor is not really interested in this type of work because it's smaller scale, right? And it doesn't necessarily result in saleable timber. And so in this case, Cold Hollow to Canada was able to help facilitate work by partnering with one of their partners, the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. And so they connected Audubon with this crew that implemented management practices that they recommended to enhance the forest structure on about 8 to 10 acres of this habitat for black-throated blues, wood thrush, and other mature forest nesting species. And so next slide. And this group, in turn, this crew gained valuable awareness and understanding of the nesting habitat needs of forest birds. And, you know, this testimonial they had in the 3 weeks that they were on this job, just had one of the most valuable experiences of their career. So very cool, kind of full circle type of example. And then there's maple syrup at the end of the day. Next slide. So in Connecticut, this is Eileen's work, Eileen and Rosa, and I believe Suzanne, approaching this in very similar ways and reaching out to private landowners, specifically land trusts. And at the Sharon Audubon Center and the Litchfield Hills Greenprint Collaborative RCP, which is actually in my neck of the woods in Connecticut where I live, the red circle there on the map, they're working to implement habitat management recommendations in the Macedonia Forest Block Important Bird Area. And several organizations have land holdings in this block, and they work together to implement measures at a landscape scale instead of doing it piecemeal. Again, very similar to that first example in Vermont with the Woodlots program, and just a theme that keeps emerging. Next slide. And so part of their work involves outreach and workshops, webinars to foresters, land managers, and land trusts with the goal of identifying land strategies and needs and bringing together those landowners, which are, I think, mostly land trusts, and contractors to line up projects and funding. And several of the organizations have land holdings in this block and are working to implement measures at a landscape scale, again, instead of piece by piece. Next slide, thanks. And this is just a little summary of results of some of their partnership and for birds. And they've been working together with this RCP very successfully for years. And I know that, you know, some of those nuanced things that the RCP really does help support, because I'm so intimately involved with an RCP and with the network, is, you know, helping to get the word out and creating material and outreach material where there may not be capacity, and vice versa, so that there's really this partnership between these two groups that help amplify and get it out and get an audience, and to help, again, Audubon reach their goals for their Healthy Forests Initiative. So now I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about some bird-friendly grassland management. case studies. And again, when we had these early conversations with partners, in the beginning of forming this initiative, regional partners, Audubon groups, in addition to bird-friendly forestry, they were really interested or already engaged in or wanted to know more and exchange with each other around bird-friendly grassland management. And so, again, we had some funding that we applied for collaboratively to seed some projects on the ground. I'm going to share one from Maine, and you can go to the next slide. From this really exciting program called Ag Allies, and it has worked with several RCPs in Maine. And since I last prepped this, you know, I can't even keep up. They've had a project in Massachusetts, and I think there's one ongoing now in Virginia. So it's worked with 2 RCPs and counting to provide financial and technical assistance to help landowners in Maine balance the needs for farming and their own economy and grassland birds. So we're going to look at that. I can go to the next slide. So I want to offer a little bit of background. If you know this holds a special place in my heart because of work that I was able to do with New Jersey and Mass Audubon back in the day on grassland. So grassland habitat in the Northeast is in short supply. So without human intervention, grasslands would succeed naturally back to forests. And so development as well as a cause of grassland habitat decline. And much of the grasslands throughout New England are maintained by farmers, right, and private landowners. And without their constant management, we would lose what little we have left. And so landscape practices that have changed over hundreds of years. And so while agriculture is relatively small, but it's important in New England, farmers recognize their vital role in maintaining grasslands for this region. And these fields, particularly, right, farmers' fields, are great nesting habitat for grassland birds. As you can see, and they're really hard to find, as you can see in that picture. And again, bobolinks, eastern meadowlarks are facing, we already saw this graphic, they're in really stark decline. And so they're really in trouble. Next slide. So, in order to understand how we can reverse this trend, just understanding why this occurred. So habitat loss is an important factor, obviously. Another contributing factor is during the nesting season, they're getting mowed over. So mowing during the nesting season can destroy active nests. But the timing of mowing is important for farmers that are managing for field, and it's also important for birds who are trying to, yield young. Next slide. So how can grassland bird conservation efforts meet the needs of both birds and farmers? And what role can a regional group of partners play and land trusts play to support that? And so we're going to look at this example. Next slide. This one program called Ag Allies that, if you don't know, I'll put the link in the chat, but it's just awesome. They began in a 2016 statewide program, part of the Somerset Soil Water Conservation District. And it's led by Laura in the red t-shirt in this picture. She's their technical director, and it aims to help Maine landowners and farmers make sustainable grassland bird friendly management choices on their land, and in turn helps to improve the chance of nesting grassland birds. Next slide. So a typical process for participation in this program is they take Ag Allies takes meeting the needs of both the farmer and the birds very seriously in their efforts to accomplish this. And so there are agreements for being part of Ag Allies, lasts for one nesting season. You're not signing up to stop mowing forever. In the spring, when obviously the birds are active and present, staff from Ag Allies comes out, meets with the farmer, assesses their fields, and we'll have a discussion with the farmer to learn about their goals, current management regime, and talk about options for management changes. And this helps Ag Allies, they get create an individualized plan similar to, you know, these forest management plans that Connecticut Audubon and Audubon Vermont are creating that offer this technical assistance to the farmer. And then this can be used to identify and target parts of the fields that can be mowed because they're not useful or being used by birds. And they'll flag those areas. So next slide. And so meeting the needs of farmers and birds. This is David Krebs. I don't know him, but Laura does. And he's one of the first folks that have signed up for the program. And he's an organic dairy farmer. And dairy farmers have one of the biggest challenges of forage needs, and delaying their harvest can impact that. So this program recognizes the impact of incorporating bird-friendly management changes on farmers. And so another opportunity they offer farmers is incentive payments to farmers to help offset any resulting loss of cost, loss of revenue of delaying that mowing. And they will also help them find other markets or for hay that, you know, I know some about this. I have some farm animals myself, but different hay for different types of animals. So they help them identify other markets for hay, or, you know, if they can't get the prime cut of hay that they normally would have if they were mowing more. And they recognize too that each day counts, right? So they go out and do frequent checks during the breeding season to see when the birds have left so that they can remove the markers and let them get to mowing once the birds have left. And if you've ever wondered, you know, what does this kind of look like in action? This is, you can just click again, Dennis. Yeah, this is balanced restoration. So this is a photo of a 3-acre unmowed block within a 12-acre lot. And they found nesting birds here and buffered it out a little bit. And so where did the RCP come in to fit into this? And while this program has focused on farmers, part of the initial partnership funding was to test again how RCPs can connect and help amplify. And so one RCP that Ag Allies connected with was called 12 Rivers. And they're composed of 7 land trusts in coastal Maine. It's this blob in pink. And they spoke at one of their meetings. They were invited to speak and hold a forum to talk about the program and to ignite interest in the program, to see who might be interested in learning more. And so what the RCP did, what that coordinator was, they helped facilitate introductions, right? They already have the local trust of these landowners. They've been working with them as a land trust for many years with this new partner, Ag Allies. They held meetings and invited Laura to come and speak about the project again to ignite interest and get them connected with resources. They did outreach on their behalf in order to identify ready and interested partners. They joined Laura at Ag Allies on site visits. Again, part of that building trust and commitment to the project. And they shared information about it with their partners throughout this 7 land trust initiative, and as well with myself and others in the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, which we are sharing across the network to help other states like Massachusetts, who implemented something, Virginia, to help share those best practices of what they did and how they did it. And so with that, I'm going to pivot a little bit in closing and preparation to close the presentation. I just wanted to reiterate some important takeaways about how partnerships can help inform and expand conservation, and then share a few resources that you might be interested in. So next slide. So partnerships are key to conservation action at scale, and that makes sense ecologically, right? Like birds don't stop at the border of another state and say, well, I better stay here because they have better protections, right? So ecologically it makes sense, and it makes sense for partnerships as well. And it's that trusting the local knowledge of partners such as land trusts, Audubon groups, that aids in connecting technical experts to landowners and farmers, and bringing resources to groups and interested landowners, and the information they need to make informed conservation decisions for birds. And working in partnership aids in the sharing of information and resources and reduces redundancies, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. It allows for partners, no matter their capacity, to participate together, and especially small groups that can't go after big grants can, and be a small part of a big grant when they're part of a partnership applying for that grant. And they can work quickly to help change the impact from the local level to a multi-town level by sharing those lessons learned. And again, there's this potential for partnerships to share with each other through the larger networks. So like that of the individual RCPs who have 20, 40 partners participating, we can share the lessons that one RCP in Maine might be learning about grassland, bird-friendly grassland management with the entire Northeast network. And it keeps people inspired and excited. This is hard work. And so when you learn of others doing something as hard and have succeeded, it can be really inspiring. So next slide. So the key to strong partnerships, no matter the scale, is building the capacity of partners. And so I, in that vein, wanted to share a few resources. Next slide. I have the link to this. I'll throw it in the chat. This is your local regional conservation partnership, the South Central Regional Land Conservation Alliance. If you aren't already connected, I'm happy to make that connection. Next slide. Our initiative put together several resources and trainings to meet the needs of these partnerships, regional conservation partnerships, Audubon groups, and land trusts. And one of them was to provide them with training that would assist them in their goals of outreach and engagement with landowners, network members, partners. And they, one of them was through eBird. And so we have all these resources online, how to do an eBird training. So it's really a train the trainer. If you're not familiar with eBird, but you want to, you can look at these resources, and I'll get you that link as well. Spin-off of that was we were able to offer, because of some grant funding, small mini grants for the regional conservation partnership groups to actually host, funds to host a workshop, an eBird workshop for their membership and partners. Next slide. And Steve Hagenbu at Audubon, Vermont, an incredibly amazing bird-friendly forestry webinar series. It was 4 parts that dug into all aspects of it. Incredible panel of speakers of Audubon and conservation folks across the Northeast, and all of these recordings are online. And again, this was in direct response to partner interest, which is why we put this series together. And the last slide. And a final example of helping to build capacity via eBird was response to, again, their express need to want to identify the best and most important land for breeding birds in the US, combined with other data for climate resiliency and protected open space. And so we developed an interactive GIS decision support tool. And I won't, no spoiler alerts, but we do have a webinar coming up February 14th. I'll put the link to register for that in the chat. And it will, showcase ways in which conservation partners can use bird data to interact with this eBird data to look at strategic land conservation in highest areas of value to birds and bird habitat. So I'll put that link in the chat, and there's the link to the tool as well, if you haven't seen it already. And so with that, I will answer any questions, and then the last slide is just my email address, but happy to answer any questions.
For the South Central Regional, is that Chris Sullivan?
John Triana and Brian Pines, I know, are two of the, it might be Chris too, but I don't know him. But Brian and John Triana works at the Regional Water Authority, and I think they hold some of their meetings there in New Haven. It's like over by IKEA.
I know John, so I'll be able to follow up.
Conservation District.
Yep.
Thanks, Katie. That was great. Just a comment about grassland birds. In the Menunkatuck chapter area, we don't really have extensive grasslands that would support breeding grassland birds. So we support grassland birds by donating to Mass Audubon's bubbling project that, as you said, pays farmers to alter their mowing so that birds can successfully breed.
Yeah, and that's a program that Ag Allies and so John has since retired, but yeah, their Bobolink project, they did an exchange of like, what is your project like and what is Ag Allies like and where can we kind of learn from each other? It was super cool. And they worked with an RCP in the North Quabbin region in Massachusetts. I didn't want this to be a 4-hour presentation, so I had to pick and choose which example to share.
If
That's great.
if you have a question, please unmute yourself and ask. Or if you're bashful, put your question in the chat.
This is Julie Wagner from the Branford Land Trust. Could I have ask
Hi,
a
Julie,
question?
go ahead.
Hi, thanks. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but the Branford Land Trust is trying to make some decisions about land management and sort of, how to maintain our fields. And we really need some expertise in that regard. And I'm wondering if there's someone in our South Central RCP that you might recommend, or even someone outside of that. I know that's not really the focus of your presentation, but it would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, you know what? Will you email me and
Yes.
I will figure out who to connect you with? Yeah, let me actually, I'll put my email address here. I got everything all ready to share in the chat. So sorry about the
Oh.
link dump, but yeah, feel free to share my email, but that would be the best way.
I'll be sending out an email tomorrow with the link to the recording and include in that links to all of the different areas that you talked about.
Okay, great. It's here in the chat too. Sorry, I can't put
Yeah.
spaces or bullets, but and Julie, my email is there too. But that would be, yeah. Let me think on that.
Anyone else?
One more question for Katie. Connection with, I know we used to have district foresters in the state of Connecticut, as part of DEP. I don't know whether they still do or not, but if they do, or if they know, is there any connection between the work you're doing in the northwest part of the state and the district foresters?
I think not, maybe 2 answers. And I think that certainly the work that Audubon, Connecticut, New York are doing with foresters, I don't know to what degree. I know they're private foresters or the district foresters. I'm not sure, but they've definitely engaged them in the work that they're doing in their habitat assessment. Same with Audubon, Vermont, work with district foresters, I believe. Like I lead an RCP, and we, when we think about things, different projects like Forest Legacy Project, federal application, we're thinking in communication with the state forester, but at a more of a partnership level, like in order to apply for a grant like that, we'd want to connect with them. But it would be more of partners within these groups that are working really directly with the foresters, not me myself, but I know that they are in their habitat assessment, certainly the forest work. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
Excellent presentation, Katie.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, before we close out, I do want to give a shout out to Highstead for the work that they're doing with Menunkatuck and CPEN at Urbanscapes Native Plant Nursery. A lot of what we do over there wouldn't be possible without the assistance of the folks from Highstead. So thanks.
It's so fun. I got to attend one of the pollinator events over the summer and just to reconnect with you all. So cool that personally my worlds were colliding, which was awesome. It's great.